Hi, I'm Dale Paulin, and welcome to this edition of the Cadence Podcast Series. This is Cadence Management Corporation's podcast. Hi, I'm Dale Paulin, and welcome to this edition of the Cadence Podcast Series. This is Cadence Management Corporation's podcast number 109, and is the third in a three-part series where we focus on keeping your projects moving forward. You can find the first and second podcasts in this series on the Cadence website or on iTunes with a search under Cadence Management. So let's jump into this. I have with me John Patton, the President and CEO of Cadence. Hi, John.
Hello, Dale. Welcome.
Thank you. John founded Cadence in 1983, and his career has touched on just about every aspect of project management. And in addition to running the company, he also provides project management training and consulting services to Cadence clients around the world. So we keep you pretty busy, I guess, don't we?
Yeah, we do, Dale, but keeping contact with the customer is really pretty important to me. So even though my travel isn't as heavy as it used to be, I still can travel long distances to reach a global audience.
And you've been doing plenty of that lately too, as I know. So John, as you know, when Cadence holds one of our project management seminars, attendees are always encouraged to fill out what we call the problem cards. And those give us some detail related to a current problem they run into in the course of managing their projects. And as we go through those problem cards, we try and pick out common themes, and those are what drive our podcast. And the problem theme we're looking at today is keeping your projects moving as they near completion, with the emphasis on as they near completion. So in this series, we try to pass on 3 key points of focus for project managers as some takeaways from this podcast. So John, tell us what this issue of keeping momentum and keeping your projects moving forward as they near completion is all about, and maybe a few key areas you want to focus on today.
Well, thank you, Dale. I think one of the best ways for me to approach this is to take one of these problem cards and read it to you, because we get it, we get it now and then. It's fairly frequent. And the one that we've pulled from the file today says, projects are taken to 80% completion, then the last 20% drags on for months. How does that sound to you as an experienced project manager?
Yeah, I've been there and done that. I know the problem, although I don't know if I've ever seen a solution to it.
Well, have you ever heard of the Pareto rule, Dale?
Well, vaguely. Maybe you can fill us in.
Well, it sounds pretty much right on that 80% is the easiest to do and the final 20% is the hardest to do.
The old 80-20 rule.
Yeah, so here we've got a project manager whose experience has been they can get that 80% done fairly well and in good order, and then the 20% drags on. So that's why we're calling it the eternal end. So it does follow the Pareto rule. This is a common problem, and it's associated with scoping, and there are solutions to it. So that's what we'll provide during and at the end of this.
Okay, great. So let's start at the beginning then. What causes this then, and what are some of the key causes? If projects are going along smoothly, this particular problem pops up late in the sort of project life cycle. What are some of the things that bring that about and cause that?
Well, let's focus on initial scoping, and there are a couple of factors there. First of all, teams tend to be in a rush to get through scoping and to do, what people call getting to work.
Right. There's so initial excitement too.
Oh yeah. There's some initial excitement, and but organizing the project is less romantic, less attractive than getting to work. They haven't spent the time, and what we see is a lot of these changes that come down towards the end, they're not really changes. Those are missed scope items that should have been there from the beginning.
Okay.
And we also know that as we approach project authorization, there are things that we discuss with the sponsors about, is it in scope or is it not in scope, and we create expectations. Well, even though the project manager and the team have defined their scope based on the resources that they're getting, there are many times when they haven't confirmed that scope with the sponsors.
Okay.
So as they get down towards the end, the sponsors start saying, where's this, where's that? And the team and the project manager are saying, well, it's out of scope, and the sponsors are saying, put it back into scope.
Right, and then it causes the whole recycle of the project almost.
Yes, yeah. It brings in change later in the project, and what extends the project is you have quite a bit of rework. If you consider the project to be nearly done, then everything fits together nicely, and inserting something new causes some rework, and that rework extends.
Okay, so in the beginning, it's making sure that you sort of throttle back the exuberance a little bit and focus on the real, true scope items.
Well, we'll talk about getting confirmation from the sponsors that this is the real scope.
Okay.
Now, another one is how good is good hasn't been put together. So when we talk about scope, we're talking about deliverables, measures, and exclusions. The measures are those numbers that tell us what working right is, because we run down towards the end of the project and the team and the project manager saying, you know, it's working, but the people who are going to use the project result are saying, yes, it's working, but it's not working well enough. So there's a negotiation, there are some arguments down towards the end of the project.
Okay.
Now let's also recognize some truths about project management. The final problems are usually the most difficult to resolve, and those things extend the project as well. And then there's another factor that occurs, and it is that if people are planned to depart a project on a certain date, and most of the work is done, their managers will reassign them and put them on another project.
Right.
Okay. Now, these people are not available after the project ends. They're not available at after the official end date of the project. And then there's an axiom about project management.
Okay.
And that is that you will experience 90% of the problems you will ever find on a project in the first 90 days of operation. Now, 90% of the problems that you'll experience after the end of the project will come in the first 90 days of operation. And if you don't have the experts, the people that were working on that project team available, then you're going to have to declare an emergency, pull them off the projects that they're on. They won't have the greatest attitude when they're being pulled back. So, go ahead.
You're almost laying traps for yourself unknowingly in the beginning.
Well, we are. Yeah, we are. And there's some things that we can do about it. And that's pretty, you know, if I were to look at the primary causes for the eternal end, I put these 5 items in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So now that we know what kind of things cause that, put your project manager's hat on, and what can a good project manager do to, see what's happening, recognize it as it's happening, and I guess in a way keep it from impacting their projects.
Okay, well, let's start right off with initial scope definition. And using a life cycle approach to project management, when the project is authorized, we have a pretty good idea of scope. And we're going to run the final scoping of the project in team meetings. The project team is there, project manager is there, and we'll invite some key people who are going to be using the results of this project to that meeting as well.
Even if those key people aren't going to be continuing on the team.
Exactly. We want to get their buy-in and sign off. The final sign off, of course, will come from the sponsors, and this will be the sign off on the fine-tuned scope, because the sponsors will have an expectation of scope at the time the project is authorized. So this is the final fine-tuning that we're going to ask them to sign off on. And the scope will consist of deliverables, measures, and exclusions. So that list of deliverables is pretty critical, and that's done in a group setting and is confirmed by the sponsors. Now, also in that group setting, we're going to identify 12 to 15 key metrics. These are called measures. These are the most difficult items to hit, the things we frequently miss, and the most complex. And what we want is a number that can measure, we call these performance measures, and we want them to be a number. For example, survives a let's say survives a 1 meter drop test. Okay. If we're creating a product, if it's software, sub-second response time. And these 12 to 15 items would be measures that we're going to take down at the end of the project to make sure that we're hitting the criteria for acceptance, which have been set during scope definition. The measures are part of scope.
Now you've sort of got a running assessment to keep track of whether or not it is slowing down or getting off track.
That's correct. That's correct. We can use those for testing during the project as well.
And is that, sorry to interrupt you, but
that's fine.
Is that extended team that you talked about in the beginning, are they brought in at that stage as well?
Yes, they are. Some of them are involved with the testing during the course of the project, but they're not members of the project team per se.
Okay.
They could even be part of a test lab that's testing the quality of what we're creating. And remember those expectations that sponsors sometimes have. Well, our scope definition is going to include a category called exclusions. So those are the things that we've talked about which are not included on that list of deliverables as we finish our scope fine-tuning on the project. Okay. Now finally, at the end of the project, we're going to use this technique called scope verification. So we're going to go down each item of scope and make sure that it is working and is working as defined. The total project result is working as defined. And for those items which are incomplete, we're going to put together a punch list. Now, a punch list is that list of incomplete items, and we will go over it immediately and determine which of those items need to be resolved before shutting down the project and which of those items are going to be resolved during the operating period, which occurs after the project is over.
Okay.
Now, a department could say, well, this is something we can address. The project team doesn't need to address it. We'll get it taken care of. So scope verification gives us a punch list. When those punch list items have gone to completion, then the project will close. And that's our agreement about the close. Now let's address this final thing that I talked about, which was the fact that you will find 90% of the problems you will ever find in the operation in the first 90 days of that operation. You do have the option, Dale, of keeping the project open 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days after the conversion point, where it's in the operating environment and is being used by people to run the operation. Now, whatever you decide, 30, 60, or 90 days, the project team is kept intact. They don't go on to other assignments. Okay. And since they are the experts, they've developed this thing, they can solve the problems faster.
And is that laid out in the scope as well?
It's laid out in the project plan, Dale. So we put a period at the end of the project plan, and we could give that a 30-day duration, and that's called problem removal, bug removal, down at the end. And again, it depends on what the company wants to do, 30, 60, or 90 days. And when that period is up, of course, we know that we will also have been removing items from the punch list. Punch list is all done. We've found most of the problems that we're going to find. We do a readiness check for closure of the project. We close out the project, and then after that part, the operating units have the responsibility for resolving any problem that comes along, and they have maintenance staff for doing that.
Sure. Okay.
So to reiterate what I've said here in terms of solutions is make a focused, intensive effort to get scope defined.
Important to get that done up front.
Very important. Deliverables, measures, and exclusions. Get that confirmed with sponsors. And as you define your measures, get 12 to 15 key metrics and keep them in front of the team, invisible and visible, not invisible, and visible throughout the project. Make sure those 12 to 15 are covered very well during testing. Use the technique called scope verification and the creation of a punch list, and then determine whether this is the kind of project that is so important that you want to extend the end date after the solution is in the operating environment, 30, 60, or 90 days.
And there's probably some standard for the type of project that you can decide, well, this is a 30-day project. This is an extension for 60 days. Or there's some metrics that you can look at and say, this is how long we're potentially going to extend it.
Well, there aren't tables that are in existence, Dale. So I would prefer to use these parameters of size, risk, and complexity, and sometimes urgency. So the larger the project, the higher the volume of problems that we're going to have. The higher the risk, probably higher volume, and the same is true with complexity. Now, sometimes, the reason I say sometimes urgency, the approach to the urgency of the project is to have a minimum or minimal scope. And if it's very high urgency, then we could get what's absolutely needed very quickly out in the operation and take these 30, 60, 90 days to do the fine tuning and maybe a couple of additional scope items so that you've got a really good solution for the operating environment.
Okay, great. So as I read this, we'll wrap up here. This problem card one more time. Projects are taken to 80% completion, and the last 20% drags on for months. It sounds like this person, or in their experience, some of the projects they've worked on have not been handled properly up front. They haven't done a good job maybe of involving sponsors, maybe just for this specific one. And there hasn't been a clear path to completion that they're all synchronized around or in alignment around.
That's correct, Dale. As we look at our customers, the thousands and tens of thousands that we've run into, over and beyond anything else, the weakness that occurs around the world really is in project planning, and that's why inadequate scope is number 2 on my list of the 8 biggest problems in project management. And if folks would like to listen to that whole podcast, there was a series at the early part of the list on the 8 biggest problems.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks, John. I appreciate your time. Now, you can find this podcast on the Cadence website. It's under www.cmc.com. And you can also find it on iTunes with a search under Cadence Management, where you'll also find the other podcasts in this Project Management Skill Builder series, and you can subscribe to upcoming Cadence podcasts as well. So thanks again, John. We look forward to talking with you again soon.
You bet.